Alright, so in this lesson of the political ideas unit of government and politics, we're going to be covering one of the other New Right philosophers. He's not really New Right, I only really say that because their philosophies are very similar, and New Right is more of a loose category, where philosophers of the mid-20th century are all kind of grouped together. Essentially, Robert Heinlein was a right-wing libertarian, but I'll elaborate more on that later. So, Robert Heinlein, a famous sci-fi author, and he is probably one of the most influential of the time, other than people like Isaac Asimov. So yeah, he lived between 1907 and 1988. Heinlein and his influence on New Right politics. Robert Heinlein was consistently libertarian throughout his life. He was essentially a neoliberal of the common New Right type, whom advocated laissez-faire capitalism, minimal government, protected negative liberties of individuals, and globalism. Now, I personally disagree with globalism, but that is one of the tenets of neoliberalism, because obviously, if you're thinking about people like Thatcher and Reagan, well, Thatcher was the reason we joined the European Economic Community, and Ronald Reagan was also a supporter of globalism in some senses. Obviously, we've found out in the modern day that it certainly has its drawbacks, but it is essentially just one of the core features of the times. Remember, if you're thinking of stuff like Star Trek or even Starship Troopers, where there are global governments and essentially one government on Earth which represents the interests of all the people, it's a nice ideal, and obviously you won't be surprised that libertarians have very idealistic views of the world, as they are rather optimistic, I would probably say. However, it does not appear to be easy to achieve in practice, as the different countries and nationalities of the world have very different values, so they don't really meld together in the cohesive way that people like Heinlein and Thatcher would have wanted. And Rand by some extension, considering we went over here last lesson. So he wrote a plethora of sci-fi books throughout his life, but the three that have most permeated modern culture are Starship Troopers, Stranger in a Strange Land, and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. He was one of the most influential American libertarians in his day. Bear in mind that at the time in which his books were most popular, it was a time when the youth of America were embracing the more hedonistic elements of libertarianism, so namely the left-wing libertarianism, in events such as Woodstock and other hippie gatherings. So obviously, the free love movement and stuff like that was going on, which, if you ever decide to read Strange in a Strange Land, certainly has some echoes of that in it, and it kind of makes left-wing libertarianism slightly seep into Heinleinian libertarianism. So, his writings were very political, and he had a profound influence on the young adults who read his books. So, now we're going to go over his most famous book, Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers was by far Heinlein's most famous book, and it is often falsely proclaimed to be a piece of pro-fascist propaganda, when this is simply not true. In the world of Starship Troopers, Earth is governed by a global government called the Terran Federation. The plot of the book is a war between the humans and an alien bug race closely resembling the tyrannage of 40K. It is often remarked that the excessive patriotism displayed in the book and the curbs put on the positive liberties of the governed is evidence of a fascist government. This is not true, as in the book a citizen, someone who has served in the military for up to 2 years has the same negative liberties protected as a non-citizen, and citizenship is available to everyone. This is because it does not discriminate based on ability. If you are disabled, you are still able to join the Terran Federation and become a citizen through your term of service. However, it's not going to be easy for you. They're not going to take it easy on you just because you're disabled. It'll be just as hard were you perfectly able. However, obviously there will be caveats to ensure that it's still possible for you to complete it. So, ergo, the franchise advocated by Heinlein can be described as a meritocratic oligarchy based on the supposition that an individual is entitled to the franchise after serving in the military, as they have proved that they are willing to put the needs of the body politic above the needs of themselves. So, to put that into layman terms, a meritocratic oligarchy means that political power is centralized within a few individuals, so that's what oligarchy means. And meritocratic, means you earn it, so you have to earn your way into this small circle of individuals where political power is vested in. And since anyone can do it, it is nowhere near close to fascist ideology. It's in fact very liberal, as classical liberals and libertarians both vehemently support the idea of meritocracy, and that an individual deserves what he has earned and nothing more, and by extension nothing less. So, in the Terran Federation, students must attend classes on history and moral philosophy, given by military veterans, typically ones with disabilities, as a means to dissuade future potential citizens from participating in the military, as it's another check and balance to ensure that only those who are willing to put the needs of the body politic above themselves actually enlist, because it gives the students the full information that if they do enlist, there's a decent chance that they're going to become disabled as a result of that. So, in this class, students are occasionally instructed about the occasional necessity to use power in violent ways. This is exemplified where they discuss stuff like the Punic Wars and how Carthage ultimately fell. I believe the Melian Compromise would be another example if you're interested for independent learning. I don't have enough time to go into it now, but just have a quick research of the Melian Compromise. And obviously the difference between the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, and Napoleon Bonaparte at the Battle of Waterloo, as they both had very different strategies. Wellington was more reserved, Napoleon was more aggressive, and obviously in the end, Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo, but it also shows that force must be used wisely. It can't just be like a blatant attack, and Wellington was very intelligent with his force, but we're getting sidetracked. So, now we're going to have a look at Stranger in a Strange Land. Stranger in a Strange Land can be best described as a novel which encapsulates the attitudes of libertarians during the sexual liberation movement. If you have ever heard of a song called The Cult of Dionysus, you will likely already have a decent understanding on what this movement was about. The first half of the book features an interesting storyline of a nurse hiding a human born on Mars from the authorities who want to capture him to gain the land rights to Mars, based on a legal precedent called the Larkin decision. The second half of the book is about a cult who embrace the Martian ways that Michael Valentine Smith, the protagonist, learnt on his time on Mars in order to gain psychic powers. The main character is Michael Valentine Smith, aka the Man from Mars, and he's responsible for much of the intrigue of the book. The aspect of Heinleinian libertarianism espoused in this book is best summarized as advocacy of the sexual revolution. Now, we didn't really go much into the storyline or the other key themes of the book. If you're interested in your own time and you feel like you want to use Heinlein in your essay, a YouTube channel called Overly Sarcastic Productions made a decent video where they essentially summarize the plot of Stranger in a Strange Land in a far more concise way than I would be able to do at the moment. So, now we're moving on to The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Heinlein also wrote The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is a book about a recreation of the American Revolution on the moon in the lunar colony of Hong Kong. This book includes some of the classical liberal tenets of Heinleinian libertarianism, such as the notion of no taxation without representation and the election of a government that represents the interests of the governed. Be that as it may, most disciples of Heinleinian libertarianism only use Starship Troopers as the core book of their philosophy, as it's far more stoic, disciplined, and aware of political philosophy than Heinlein's other books. If you discuss Heinlein in the exam, take care to only attribute Starship Troopers to his ultimate philosophy, as it best summarizes the core tenets of Heinleinian libertarianism. Carl Benjamin has produced a phenomenal video in which he elaborates on the principles of Heinleinian libertarianism in more detail than we have here. Just remember that Heinleinian libertarianism embraces the right-wing elements of libertarianism, in spite of the possible misconceptions brought about by his advocacy of free love, which was typical of left-wing libertarian hippies of his era. So, now we're just going to have a quick summary of Heinleinian libertarianism as an ideology. So, Heinlein's famous works were Stranger in a Strange Land, Starship Troopers, and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. We covered all of those in this lesson very briefly. And Heinlein's core ideas were individualism, a meritocratic oligarchy of franchise holders, so essentially voters, a small state, laissez-faire economics, the protection of negative liberties by a constitution, globalism, and the necessity of the use of force in certain circumstances. That is Heinleinian libertarianism, and it is essentially the other part of the new right that we're going to go over. We might go over Robert Nozick at another time, but yeah, that's pretty much it for Heinlein. Thank you.